actors in front of a live audience with no supporting cast, no elaborate sets, just their talents, their courage, and some pretty great material to sustain them. Each presentation of this season's Hall of Fame is an intimate portrait of a celebrated figure drawn from the words and thoughts of that person. Mr. Lincoln is a memory of the public and private man culled from historical research by Herbert Mitgang, the author. It's a recollection of Lincoln in courtship, Lincoln the young lawyer, the struggling politician, finally, the divided nation's tireless commander-in-chief working to preserve the Union. Tonight, Roy Dotrice is Mr. Lincoln in a performance that received standing ovations from the audience in Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., the very place where John Wilkes Booth shot Abraham Lincoln over a century ago. And now, Mr. Lincoln.
You know, all men and women have certain turning points in their lives, flashes of wisdom buried deep in their minds. I've often wondered what it was that first turned Abraham Lincoln against slavery in his youth. Thinking back on it, I believe it was the slave auctions I witnessed with my own eyes when I was working as a flat boatman, poling a raft of goods down the Mississippi River. Near the riverbank in New Orleans, one could see dealers in human degradation, selling men and women like so many hogs. On the block was a beautiful girl called Eliza. A Frenchman from New Orleans bid $1,200 for her, but his bid was topped by a young Methodist minister. The auctioneer pulled the dress from Eliza's shoulders, exposing her breasts, and said, "Who's gonna lose a chance like this?" The sweating Frenchman bid $1,465. Once again, the young minister outbid him. The auctioneer lifted Eliza's dress, bearing her body from her feet to her waist, slapped her on the thigh and said, "Who's gonna win this prize?" The Frenchman bid $1,580. The auctioneer lifted his gavel. The girl looked at the minister in terror and in pleading. He bid $1,585. The gavel came down, and Eliza fell in a faint. "Well, sir, you got her damn cheap. What are you gonna do with her?" And the minister, whose name was Fairbanks, and who was one of the leaders of the anti-slavery movement in Ohio, said, "Free her." I've since learned that Mr. Fairbanks has spent 17 years in the state penitentiary for his anti-slavery activities, but he was one of the lucky ones. In the southern states, leaders of slave revolts could and had been hanged. I saw a gentleman who had bought 12 slaves in different parts of Kentucky, taking them to his farm in the south. Each Negro had an iron clevis around his left wrist, which was fastened by means of a short chain to the main chain. So there they were, all 12 of them, strung up like so many fish upon a line. And in this condition, they were being separated forever from their parents, from their wives, from their children, going into perpetual slavery, where the lash of the master is ruthless and unrelenting. Believe it or not, I was a military man once. Oh, yes, sir. I fought, bled, and came away unscathed. I didn't break my sword because I had none to break, but I bent my musket pretty badly. You know, I became a military man for the same reason that has inspired many an enlistment in the name of patriotism. I had nothing better to do. You see, there was some trouble between the Indians and the settlers in northwest Illinois. I volunteered for 30 days. The Clary's Grove boys back in the village of New Salem elected me captain, an honor which gave me more satisfaction than any subsequent success in my life. Mind you, the Clary's Grove boys were no easy bunch of men to drill into obeying orders. And I was an amateur myself. I must tell you, there was one occasion. I just could not remember what the order was. To pass 2 platoons, endwise, 2 by 2, through a gate. So I yelled out, "This company is dismissed for 2 minutes. Then it will fall in again on the other side of the gate." Well, I willingly gave up the life of a soldier and returned to the village of New Salem to become postmaster. Now, one of the things I liked best about the postmaster's job was it gave me a chance to read the newspapers before I delivered them. When I was postmaster, I remember I once received a letter from a big bank in New York City asking about the financial rating of one of my neighbors. I answered, "Sirs, I am well acquainted with him and know his circumstances. First of all, he has a wife and a baby. Taken together, they should be worth $50,000 to any man. Secondly, he has an office in which there is a table worth $1.50 and 3 chairs worth, say, $1. Last of all, there is in one corner a large rat hole which will bear looking into. Yours respectfully, A. Lincoln, Postmaster." One day at an auction in Springfield, I bought a copy of Blackstone's Commentaries. And day after day, month after month, I read and reread them, studying the principles of the English common law. At first, I practiced on my good neighbors. We both took a chance. Later, I gained my knowledge of the law by riding the legal circuit from courthouse to courthouse. And eventually, I went into partnership with my young friend, Billy Herndon. And together, we formed the legal firm of Lincoln and Herndon. We took every case that came our way, no matter how small. Hey, Billy, you know, this filing system could do with a little improvement. I've started a new file labeled, "If nowhere else, look for it here." You know, strangers often wondered how it was that I ever managed to get into politics. Well, I did so at the same time that I practiced law. And I tell you this, you don't wait to be pushed forward by older men. No, sir. All it takes to run for office in this country is to declare yourself. Lung power counts more than a campaign purse. Fellow citizens, I presume you all know who I am. I have been solicited by my friends and neighbors to run for office in these local elections. Now, my opponent has alluded to the fact that I am a young man. Well, I am younger in years than I am in the tricks of politicians. But I would rather die now than, like the gentleman, live to see the day that I would have to erect a lightning rod over my house, as he has done in Springfield, to protect a guilty conscience from an offended God. What's that, sir? No, I don't mind heckling, as long as there's a question at the end of it. And in your case, sir, it doesn't even have to be an intelligent question. My politics, short and sweet, like the old woman's dance. If elected, I promise I will bring to work a sincere heart. Whether I will bring a head equal to that heart is for future times to determine. Well, I lost, running 8th in a field of 13. But at least in my own village of New Salem, I received 277 out of 300 votes, and that encouraged me. And anyway, one early defeat wasn't going to dissuade me from following politics, my lifetime preoccupation. I ran again for the state legislature. I gained office and was subsequently re-elected for 3 further terms. To Springfield, at different times, came two Marys, both from Kentucky. Mary Owens, the daughter of a well-fixed farmer, about my age. And wait. No, I lie. She was a lot heavier than me. And Mary Todd, 10 years younger than I, one of the Kentucky Todds. That's Todd, by the way, with 2 Ds. With God, 1 is enough, but the Todds needed 2. Well, I courted the first one sporadically and married the second one eventually. I had made a few tentative professions of affection toward Miss Mary Owens, who was a pleasingly plump young woman. But unfortunately, she left Springfield and returned home to Kentucky. And during the long sessions of the state legislature, I found myself thinking about her and wishing to see her again. And then, after 3 years, she returned to Springfield. I must say I found myself stomached a little to see her in the flesh rather than in my imagination. I knew she was oversized, but she now appeared a fair match for Falstaff. I knew she was called an old maid, but you see, her age was difficult to determine because her skin was too full of fat to permit it contracting into wrinkles. But her want of teeth and weather-beaten look gave me the notion that nothing could have commenced at the size of infancy and reached its present bulk in less than 40 years. In short, I was not at all pleased with her. I then had to write one of the most difficult letters of my life. It took a little doing to disengage myself. Well, between building up my law practice and serving on the state legislature, I had very little time for the fairer sex. And so it was not until the winter of 1840 that I began to pay particular court to Miss Mary Todd. She came from a distinguished Kentucky family. Well, so did I. Mine was distinguished by its poverty. She had charm and personality and a long line of suitors. I went up to her to dance and I said, Miss Todd, I want to waltz with you in the worst way. And I'm afraid I did. Well, eventually, we became engaged. Now, I wanted to try and impress her and her distinguished family. In fact, I even dueled for the lady. Well, at least I accepted a challenge to risk my neck gallantly on her behalf. You see, Mary and a friend of hers, Julia Jane, had written a series of anonymous letters to the editor of the Sangamo Journal. Now, the letters were nothing more than political horseplay, but they insulted James Shields, the Illinois state auditor, accusing him of dishonesty and strutting in Springfield society. Now, Shields was a County Tyrone boy with an Irishman's short fuse. And what's worse, he was a Democrat. Irish and Democratic, that's an explosive combination. Well, I tried to cover up for the ladies by claiming the letters as my own. And to make matters worse, I offered to fight Shields with potatoes, shillelaghs, or cow dung at 5 paces. I don't know why this only infuriated him. The next thing I knew, we were on a horse ferry with our seconds, bound for an island across the river. Well, when we got there, our seconds tried to persuade us to call the whole thing off. Don't you realize, they said, it is against the law. The winner can be jailed. Not going to do the loser any good either. I know, says Shields, but my honor must be satisfied. That reminds me of a story, I said, about the young man from Kentucky who had enlisted in the War of 1812. And he was bidding farewell to his sweetheart when she told him that she had embroidered a bullet pouch on which she had stitched the words, victory or death. Well, the young man thought it over for a few moments. He said, ain't that a little strong? Couldn't you write victory or be crippled? Shields didn't laugh. Now look here, Shields, I said, you know very well I had no intention of damaging your reputation as a gentleman. Are you willing to publish a statement to that effect? Yes, I said. So he stuck out his hand, we shook, and returned arm in arm to Springfield. Well, when news of our dueling fiasco got back to town, far from impressing Mary, she thought I'd made her a laughingstock. And so on New Year's Day, 1841, my fatal first, we broke off our engagement. Mary, there really is no point in this conversation trying to prove whose fault it is, yours or mine. Mary, love isn't a court case to be won or lost. Matrimony isn't a contract, it's a conditional emotion, mutually felt. You and I, Mary, we're just not ready for marriage. That's all. That's what I said. But what I felt was desperation. Losing her was like losing a part of myself. I was miserable, sick in mind and body. I knew unless I got help for my condition, I'd be a goner. Doc, are you in? It's me, Lincoln. You thought I'd be coming back, thank goodness for that. Oh, Doc, I've been making a discreditable exhibition of myself. I've had 2 cat fits and a duck fit. Sometimes I feel as crazy as a loon. There's a wide streak of melancholy in my soul, Doc. And now, dreams disturb my sleep. Bad dreams. Even when I turn to Shakespeare to try and take my mind off my melancholy, every passage seems to cry out about my own condition. I try to write down what I feel on paper, Doc, you know, my own poor attempts at poetry. Shall I read it to you? Oh, why should the spirit of mortal be proud? Like a swift-fleeing meteor, a fast-flying cloud, a flash in the lightning, a break in the wave. He passes from life to his rest in the grave. That depresses you too, Doc. You know, I must now be the most miserable man alive. Well, what's your diagnosis, Doc? Hypochondriasis? Oh, what's that in plain language? Hellish misery. Oh, thanks, Doc. That's a great help. Well, about a year later, after many a night visit to Doc Henry, Simeon Francis, the editor of the Sangamo Journal, and his wife arranged for Mary and me to meet once more. Oh, be friends, he said. And I realized, the moment I saw her again, why I had been so miserable without her. Oh, Mary, I said, you look wonderful. She returned the compliment. Abraham, she said, you look terrible. Well, we realized there was still laughter in our hearts. We were a little older now, a little wiser, a little more tolerant of our mutual peculiarities. The skies of summer brightened. And so, in the autumn of 1842, Mary Todd and Abraham Lincoln pledged their love for life. We were married. It was a source of profound wonder to me then, and it still is. Mary Lincoln and I had 4 sons, all born in Springfield: Robert, Willie, Eddie, and little Ted. Well, now as a family man, I decided, with Mary's blessing, that I ought to look for challenges beyond the small town of Springfield and the Illinois General Assembly. I told some of my political friends, if you should hear anyone say that Abraham Lincoln doesn't want to go to Congress, I'd wish you'd tell him that you have reason to believe that he is mistaken. The fact is, I very much want to go. Do not keep this too confidential. Fellow citizens and members of the 7th Congressional District, I'm honored to run as your candidate and friend. My Democratic opponent, preacher Peter Cartwright, is seizing upon false issues. He says that I openly scoff at Christianity. Now, it is true I am not a member of any church, but I have never denied the truth of the Scriptures. And I personally would not support a man for office who was an open scoffer of religion. You know, Preacher Cartwright reminds me of another preacher from southern Illinois who got up in the pulpit one day and announced that our Savior was the only perfect man to have ever appeared on earth, and there was no record anywhere in the Bible of a perfect woman. Well, a lady interrupted and said, I know a perfect woman, and I have heard about her every day for the past 20 years. The preacher asked, who is she? And she said, my husband's first wife. You know, I went to hear Preacher Cartwright campaign at one of his prayer meetings. He said, all those who wish to give their hearts to God and to go to heaven will rise. Men, women, and children got to their feet. He saw me still sitting there. He said, all those who do not wish to go to hell will rise. And then he said, I see that all of you save one do not wish to go to hell. The sole exception is Mr. Lincoln. May I ask, Mr. Lincoln, where you are going? Well, now, Preacher Cartwright asked me directly where I'm going. Heaven or hell? So I'm going to answer him with equal directness. I would prefer not to go to either. Yet, I am going to Congress. Well, what was the final count in the Sangamo Journal? Lincoln, 6,340, Cartwright, 4,829. Well, perhaps Preacher Cartwright has now learned there was a little truth in what I said at Clinton. You can fool some of the people all the time. You can fool all the people some of the time. But you can't fool all the people all the time. I hope the Sangamo Journal and other newspapers will continue to refer to me as plain Mr. Lincoln. And so I prepare to take up my duties as a congressman. And I wanted to go to Washington. The United States Supreme Court decided wrongly that the Negro was a chattel, not a human being, and could not sue for his freedom. And that the southern states, the slave states, could not be deprived of their human property rights. Property rights in human beings. You know, our progress in degeneracy in this country is pretty rapid. We began by declaring that all men are created equal. We now read it that all men are created equal except Negroes. When these know-nothings gain control, I think I shall prefer emigrating to some other country where they make no pretense of loving liberty, to Russia, for example, where despotism can be taken pure without the base alloy of hypocrisy. It is time to draw the line. If I ever get the chance to hit the institution of slavery, I'm going to hit it hard. Oh yes, I wanted to go to Washington. Washington, April 1848. My dear Mary, in this troublesome world, we're never quite satisfied. When you were here, Mary, I thought you hindered me some in attending to business. But now that I have nothing but business, no variety, it has grown exceedingly tasteless to me. I hate to sit down and write documents, and I hate to be in this old room alone. What did Robert and Eddie think of the little letters I wrote them? Please, Mary, don't let the blessed fellows forget their father. Most affectionately, A. Lincoln. Oh, Mary. Mary. It has returned again. My old malady. Melancholia. I should be exhilarated. But depression clouds my mind. Foreboding dreams. Lexington, May, 1848, my dear husband. How much I wish, instead of writing, we were together this evening. I feel very sad away from you. I feel wearing and tired enough to know that this is Saturday evening, and our children are upstairs asleep. Do not fear they have forgotten you. I was only jesting. Even Ed's eyes brightened at the mention of your name. Truly yours, M.L. In the lodging house where I stayed with several of my fellow congressmen, we would sit around the fire after dinner discussing the subject that divided friends, slavery. They asked me what I felt in my heart. I said, as I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master. This is my idea of democracy. Anything that differs from this is not democracy. But as a freshman in the party out of power, I could do little toward abolishing slavery in my short time in office. My one term as a congressman came to an abrupt halt when I challenged the president. You see, President Polk's Democrats were trying to get us to justify an unjust war against Mexico. And although I knew it would not sit too well with my constituents back home in Springfield, I felt it was my duty to speak out. In his war message, the president has stated that the soil was ours where hostilities commenced with Mexico. But the president's evidence fails. It is a singular fact that he sent American troops into the midst of a Mexican settlement. There and thereby the first blood of this war was shed. On that very spot, the war with Mexico was unnecessarily and unconstitutionally commenced. Let the president answer candidly, without evasion. If he can show me that the soil was ours, where that first blood was shed, I shall be most happy to reverse my vote. But if he will not do this, he must be deeply conscious of being in the wrong. And he must feel that the blood of this war, like the blood of Abel, is crying to heaven against him. Well, I guess my time is up. I gladly give over my last minute to the glorifiers of war. They will need it more than I. Mary, I'll join you and the boys in the kitchen in a few moments. I just want to read the newspapers first, dear. Did you see what the Illinois State Register had to say, Mary? Well, I expected criticism, but this, I think, is excessive. Our district has seen many gallant soldiers go off to war. What will these brave men say when they learn that their representative has declared the cause in which they suffered to be unnecessary and unconstitutional? Well, Mary, some of them won't say anything. they'll be the silent casualties. Henceforth, Abraham Lincoln will be known as the Benedict Arnold of Illinois. Branded as a traitor. Well, Mary, I'm afraid you're no longer the wife of a United States congressman. Still, I can always turn to Shakespeare for solace. As the Duke of Venice says in Othello, to mourn a mischief that is past and gone is next way to draw new mischief on. What cannot be preserved when fortune takes, patience her injury a mockery makes. Well, Mary, I can always practice patience if I have to. And if not, I can always practice law. So it was time to hitch up and ride the legal circuit again and wait for fresh opportunities. They came sooner than expected, with a proposal to extend slavery into the new territories. On this burning issue, I decided to run for a place in the Senate against Judge Stephen A. Douglas. Fellow citizens, as this campaign continues, Judge Douglas becomes more and more desperate. He is now trying to make capital out of the fact that I once worked in a grocery store in New Salem that sold whiskey. Oh, what the judge says is true. Oh, yes, what the judge says is true. But what he didn't say is that he was my best customer. And I'm just going to add one small point. I have since left my side of the counter while Judge Douglas sticks to his. Judge Douglas says that he is opposed to Negro citizenship. He claims that this government was made by white men for white men and their posterity forever. But I say there is no reason why the Negro is not entitled to every right enumerated in the Declaration of Independence, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Judge Douglas says the Negro is not my equal. But I say in the right to eat the bread which his own hand earns without leave of anyone, he is my equal and the equal of any living man. What's that? If I love Negroes so much, why don't I marry one? I protest against that counterfeit logic that assumes because I do not want a black woman for a slave, I must necessarily want her for a wife. I need not have her for either. I can just let her alone. That is all I ask for the Negro. If you do not like him, let him alone. If God gave him but little, that little let him enjoy. My friends, today closes the campaign. The planting and the culture are over, and there remains but the harvest. If there is a single man among us who does not believe that the institution of slavery is wrong, he ought not to be with us. Slavery is a violation of the eternal right and the greatest threat to the Union. Oh yes, we have temporized with it over the years because of the necessity of our condition. But as sure as God reigns and school children read, that foul, black lie can never be consecrated into God's hallowed truth. I was defeated by Judge Douglas for a place in the Senate. But you know, from that senatorial defeat, there sprang a new hope in my mind, a new dream. How did it all begin? Well, perhaps it started with an article which appeared in the Chicago Tribune which said, although beaten, Lincoln is now a national man and the Republican Party's future spokesman. This view seemed to be shared by the nominations committee who visited me at my home in Springfield, headed by their chairman, Mr. Jesse Phil. Sit down, Jesse. You can't be serious. You think that I could make a formidable candidate for the presidency? Oh, Jesse, I don't know what to say. And that for me is unusual. Will you have a drink, Jesse? You will, good. Mary, pour Jesse a glass of iced water. Now, I have to be honest, Jesse. I have to tell you, the taste is in my mouth a little to become president. But I've stated many times I don't think I'm fit for the presidency. There are other men far more capable than I, men like Seward, Chase. Now, these are men with very positive qualities. Many people seem to think my qualities are more negative than positive. They have long records. I have none. I was born and have ever remained in the humble walks of life. I have no wealthy relations to recommend me. That's just the kind of candidate you're looking for? Mary, you didn't put anything in that ice water, did you? Well, Jesse, if you're serious, of course I should be honored to accept the nomination. But I tell you this, Jesse, there is no way that I am going to that Republican convention in Chicago. No, honestly, I mean it, Jesse. I really do not feel enough of a candidate to go. Good day to you, Jesse. And thanks for your confidence. However misplaced. Well, I did not attend the convention in Chicago. Instead, I campaigned on behalf of the Republican cause. I traveled over 4,000 miles. I made 23 speeches, never once expressing in public my hopes as a presidential candidate. When a not very great man is mentioned for a very great position, his head is apt to be turned a little. The convention in Chicago lasted 3 days. At the end of the first day, my backers wired me, very quiet, but we are moving heaven and earth. At the end of the second day, keep cool, things is working. At the beginning of the third day, very hopeful, don't get excited. And at the end of the third day, we did it. Glory to God. From my inmost heart, I congratulate you. Jesse Phil. In the national election, the voters were pretty badly split, reflecting all the divisions within the North and the South and in the minds of the people. Two ladies who were Quakers were overheard in conversation in a railway carriage. I think Judge Douglas will be president. Why does thee think so? Because Judge Douglas is a praying man. So is Abraham Lincoln a praying man. Yes, but the Lord will think Abraham Lincoln is joking. Well, happily, the Lord did not think Abraham Lincoln was joking. And neither did the voters. And so I prepared to return to Washington. No longer as a one-term congressman, but as president of the United States. United, but divided. Hey, Billy, don't forget our new file, will you? If nowhere else, look for it here. You know, we've been partners now, Billy, for over 16 years. We've never had a cross word in all that time. Now I want that signboard of Lincoln and Herndon to remain hanging there, undisturbed. Give our clients to understand the election of a president makes no change in the firm of Lincoln and Herndon. If I live, Billy, I'm coming back here one day, and you and me will go on practicing law as if nothing had happened. not in my situation can appreciate my feelings of sadness at this party. To this place and to these people, I owe everything. I've lived here in Springfield for a quarter of a century. And I've passed from a young to an old man. Here my children have been born. And one is buried. I now leave here, not knowing when or whether ever I may return.
This is PBS, the Public Broadcasting Service. The Hall of Fame is made possible by a grant from Hallmark Cards, Incorporated.
President Lincoln was watching a performance of the play Our American Cousin when John Wilkes Booth shot him. A doctor in the audience, Charles Leal, rushed to attend the unconscious president. He was taken across the street to the home of William Peterson. Lincoln never regained consciousness. He died the next morning, Good Friday, April 15th, 1865. Tonight's Mr. Lincoln, Roy Dotrice, began his acting career in a World War II German prisoner of war camp where he was held for 2 years. In 1958, he joined the Royal Shakespeare Company, and during his 8 years with them, played every major Shakespearean role. His performance in the Broadway and London productions of Brief Lives made it the world's longest-running one-man show. Now, back to Mr. Lincoln.
Fellow countrymen, this country belongs to the people who inhabit it. When they shall grow weary of their existing government, they can exercise their constitutional right to amend it, or their revolutionary right to dismember and overthrow it. My countrymen, one and all, take time and think well. Nothing valuable can be lost by taking time. Plainly, the central idea of secession is the very essence of anarchy. Physically speaking, we cannot separate. We cannot remove the respective sections of this country from each other, nor can we build an impassable wall between them. A husband and a wife may be divorced and go out of the presence and beyond the reach of each other. But the separate parts of a country cannot do this. They cannot but remain face to face. And intercourse, either amicable or hostile, must continue between them. In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, lies the momentous issue of civil war. I am loath to close. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passions may have been strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. the mystic chords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot's grave to every heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely it must be, by the better angels of our nature. My speech went down reasonably well, but it could not stop the juggernaut of war. Over 250,000 men were assembled in the Army of the Potomac, commanded by General George McClellan, who thought he was a little Napoleon, because the papers told him so. Not far away, the Army of Northern Virginia was forming, 100,000 strong, led by General Robert E. Lee. The armies faced each other, the blue versus the gray. Washington became an armed camp. War knows no holidays, but that is how the Civil War began. Civilians carried picnic lunches from Washington to watch the first battle across the Potomac at a little creek called Bull Run. Our retreat was led by a scared, fast-running congressman with his coattails flying. The war had started. The military telegraph office was where I heard the news of the first battle, mostly bad. Good morning, boys. Still trying to decipher the latest from General McClellan? What is it? We have captured 6 cows. What shall we do with them? Send him a supply, Captain Eckert. As to the 6 captured cows, please milk them. You know, the trouble with McClellan is he has the slows. Oh, here's another from McClellan. He tells me now that he has retired to Centerville, where he will be able to hold his men. I don't like that attitude. I don't like to hear that his men need holding. Send him his reply. General McClellan, if you do not wish to use your army in battle, may I borrow it for a while? A. Lincoln. You know, McClellan doesn't know the difference between a chestnut horse and a horse chestnut. Send this to Major General Joe Hooker. I've heard you recently saying that both the Army and the government need a dictator. It was, of course, not because of this remark, but in spite of it, that I'm allowing you to keep your command. Only those generals who gain successes can set up dictators. What I now ask of you is military success, and I will risk the dictatorship. And please, Major General Hooker, do not send me any more urgent dispatches date-lined headquarters in the saddle. Your trouble is you have your headquarters where your hindquarters should be. Mr. Nicolay, would you take a letter, please, to the Honorable Horace Greeley, New York Tribune. As to the policy you say I seem to be pursuing, I do not mean to leave you or anyone else in any doubt. I would save the Union the shortest way under the Constitution. If I could save it by not freeing any slaves, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would do that also. I have stated my purpose according to my view of official duty, but I mean no modification of my oft-expressed personal view that all men everywhere should be free. A. Lincoln. Mary, after all these years, you are still a child wife, requiring protection from flattering storekeepers. You seem to have outfitted yourself with an entire issue of Godey's Ladies' Book. Satin bonnets, black laces from Europe, gloves by the dozen. You know, you are the best friend of the New York merchants. And now this, for wallpaper. You have overrun an appropriation for redecorating for the White House by $6,500. Mary, I cannot possibly approve of this. I'll pay for it out of my own pocket first. It would nostrils of the American people to have it said that their president had agreed overrunning an appropriation for flub-dubs for this damned old house, while the soldiers have no blankets. Now, Mary, please, let's have no more of these extravagances. I now have to deal with the most urgent matter that will ever cross my desk at the White House: the emancipation of the Negroes. When I meet with my cabinet, I'm going to put before them the Proclamation of Freedom. I have an argument, Mary, which I think they will find difficult to oppose. It is simply this: by putting the black man in Union blue, we will so increase our fighting power that we will sound the death knell for the Confederacy and for slavery itself. Should help to end the war sooner, and I hope save lives. Mary, with all my heart, I truly believe that those perpetuating the institution are blowing out the moral lights around us. I don't know if you can remember, but when we spoke of this back in Springfield, I said, if I ever had a chance to hit the institution, I would hit it hard. But the time was not then ripe. Now it is, because of moral and military necessity. The moment has come, Mary. Gentlemen, be seated. Now, I've called you together because I want to deal with two matters. The first, a very nettlesome matter, which has become one of my most unpopular acts in your state courts. I refer to the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, so that those men who have been arrested as traitors to the Union cause cannot be set free merely by a court order. Now, if any of you feel that I should not suspend habeas corpus until I have congressional approval, please say nay. Secretary of State Seward, nay. Treasury Secretary Chase, nay. Secretary of War Stanton, nay. Attorney General Bates, nay. What say you, Postmaster General Blair? Nay. And you, Navy Secretary Wells? Nay. And finally, you, Interior Secretary Smith? Nay. Nay, 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 nay. Well, gentlemen, the ayes have it. I'm sorry, gentlemen, but some of these subversives are mad dogs who would stop at nothing if they were released. You know, that reminds me of a story about the man who was walking along the country lane with a pitchfork over his shoulder. Just as he was passing this farmhouse, a mad dog rushed out and attacked him. So the man had to kill the dog with a pitchfork. The angry farmer said, "Why did you kill my dog? Or why did your dog attack me? Well, why didn't you fend him off with a blunt end? Well, why didn't your dog attack me with his blunt end?" What's that, Mr. Wells? How can I indulge in such levity? Sir, if I did not take some momentary respite from the crushing burden I am carrying, I think, sir, my heart would break. Now, gentlemen, we come to a matter of much greater importance on which I trust we are all in agreement. The need of a proclamation to emancipate the Negroes. Now, I have distributed copies among you all, and I hope we are in agreement before I now sign it. Thank you, gentlemen. I was never more certain in my life that I was doing right. than I am by signing this piece of paper. But I have been receiving calls and shaking hands since 9 o'clock this morning. And my right arm is almost paralyzed. Now, this is a signature which will be very closely examined. If my hand trembles, people will say, he had compunctions. Anyway, it's going to be done. Gentlemen, it is done. We are now like whalers who have been on a long chase. At last, we've got our harpoon into the monster. But we have to steer very carefully, because with one flip of his tail, he could send us all into eternity. A proclamation. I do so order and declare that all persons held as slaves henceforward shall be forever free. And the government will recognize and maintain the freedom of said persons. I hereby enjoin upon the person so declared to be free to abstain from all violence unless in necessary self-defense. And I recommend to them that in all cases, when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages. I further declare that all such persons will be received into the armed services of the United States. And upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice warranted by the Constitution, upon military necessity, I invoke the considerate judgment of mankind and the gracious favor of Almighty God. A wave of fury swept the South. The Richmond Enquirer said, Lincoln is outraging private property rights. He is inciting Negroes to rape, burn, and kill. Lincoln is breaking all the laws of civilized warfare. Civilized warfare. There's a contradiction. Between May the 2nd and May the 4th, at Chancellorsville, the Union lost over 17,000 men, while the Confederates lost over 12,000. In less than 3 days, nearly 30,000 boys, brothers in blue and gray, cut down by bullets and bayonets. Oh, my offense is rank. It smells to heaven. It hath the primal eldest curse upon it. A brother's murder. What if this cursed hand were thicker than itself in brother's blood? Is there not rain enough in the sweet heaven to wash it white as snow? But why should I expect God to forgive me and not the Confederate leaders? Both sides pray to the same God, and each invoke God's aid against the other. In the Civil War, I think God's purpose may be entirely different from that of either party. No family is immune from tragedy along the battle routes to the south, including my own. Mary has lost 3 brothers killed in this war. And now that our second son, little Willie, has just died in the White House, the frightened look in her eyes when I enter a room appalls me. If anything should happen to Robert or Tad or to myself, I think it would send Mary mad. Still, I have to defend her against slanderous attacks. I, Abraham Lincoln, President of these United States, appear before this Senate Committee on the Conduct of the War of my own volition to say the following. I, to my own knowledge, know it to be grossly untrue that my wife has held treasonable communication with the enemy. This is a vicious rumor. She is as loyal as I. I most strongly disavow these outrageous charges. But persecution was in the air. After further Union disasters at Fredericksburg, my own Republican senators met in secret caucus to vote on a resolution asking me to resign. After the meeting, I was visited at the White House by Senator King. "What do these men want?" I asked him. "Sir," he replied, "they are very violent towards you and your administration, and some of them wish to get rid of you. And I'm half disposed to gratify them." That's what I said. But I knew that I had lashed myself firmly to the helm, that the country's fortunes and my own were too closely bound together, that if I were to relinquish my post, it would spell certain and inevitable ruin for our country. So in the meantime, I carried on with my everyday routine at the White House. Each day at noon, I ordered the doors to be opened, and the people who were waiting to be admitted, they would rush in, crowding the narrow room. People pleading clemency for their sons or their husbands, some seeking jobs, others just wanting to pour their hearts out. Gave me a chance to meet the people. I remember one gentleman, he came to see me. He wanted a pass to go through our lines to the enemy capital of Richmond. I said, "My dear sir, I should be very happy to issue a pass, but I'm afraid my passes are not being respected." Why, in the past 2 years, I have issued passes to go to Richmond to more than 250,000 men in the Army of the Potomac. No one's got there yet. Many an old friend from the 8th Judicial Circuit dropped in to see me at the White House. I remember one old courthouse colleague, he said to me one day, he said, "Abe, tell me, Abe, what's it feel like to be president?" I said, "That reminds me of a story about the man who was tarred and feathered and ridden out of town on a rail. Someone asked him how he liked it. He said, "Well, if it wasn't for the honor of the thing, I'd much rather have walked." The war of attrition had become total war. Houses were burned, railroads ripped up, mills and factories destroyed, cotton put to the torch, cattle and provisions foraged. Oh yes, our men had become well versed in the art of destruction. But at last I found my general in Grant. He realized our main objective was not Southern real estate, but General Lee's army. Oh, I couldn't spare that man. He fought. Some people said he drank too much. So I ordered a few barrels of his particular brand of whiskey to be sent to the other generals. I only had one small difficulty with General Grant. he issued Order Number 11, expelling Jewish peddlers from his camps. Now, I had no objection to any of my generals expelling peddlers who had defied military regulations. But Order Number 11 prescribed against an entire religious class. Many of the Hebrew faith were fighting in our ranks with great gallantry. This was indefensible. I revoked General Grant's order without objection from him when I explained why, and this ended the temporary injustice. And here are some more requests for pardons from men waiting to be shot. My generals say that I impair military discipline, but it relieves me if I can find a good reason to save a man's life. Mr. Nicolay, would you inscribe these letters and messages and get them off right away, please? To the Secretary of War, my dear sir, regarding the 14-year-old sentenced to be shot for desertion. Instead, let us spank this drummer boy and send him home. A. Lincoln. Yes, Mr. Nicolay, just as I dictated it. I want you to telegraph this to Major General Sheridan in the field. Suspend execution of death sentence in this case and send record of trial to me for re-examination. If a man had more than one life, I think perhaps a little hanging wouldn't hurt this man. But as he has only one, I believe I will pardon him. A. Lincoln. The grim news of Gettysburg began to arrive in Washington. Gettysburg should have been the last battle. We had Lee's army bottled up. But they got away. We buried 6,832 men at Gettysburg. I was invited to say a few appropriate remarks at the dedication of the cemetery there. Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of it as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It's altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate. We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it. Far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here. But it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work that they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The battles and the bloodletting continued for nearly a year and a half after the dedication at Gettysburg. But the end was inevitable. The North had the manpower and the industry on their side, while the rebellion had only a dying dream of a separate government for Dixieland. On April the 9th, Palm Sunday, at 4:30 p.m., Grant telegraphed Stanton, General Robert E. Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia this afternoon on terms proposed by myself. The war was over. After 4 years of civil strife, the death roll on both sides came to over 500,000 men. General Grant allowed the surrendered men in gray to take their mules and their horses and return home for the spring plowing. It was a time to plant seeds, not men, in the American soil. But I could not forget the Kentucky father who lost both his sons, one dying for the North, the other dying for the South. Over his boys' joint graves, the father had inscribed, God knows which was right. The hatred festered by the violent years would not quickly fade. The sacrifices would not easily be forgotten, but at least the slaughter had ceased, and the bitterness would eventually dissolve into the realms of memory. Dawn rose over Washington with a boom of cannon. Through the muddy, gaslit streets, the crowd surged toward the White House. Civilians linked arms with mud-splattered veterans who had marched from the Mississippi through the shell holes of Shiloh. On the balcony of the White House, my son, Tad, held a captured Confederate flag. Cheers rocketed skywards as he waved the stars and bars. From the balcony below me in the shadows, I could see Negro soldiers standing guard, rifles at the ready, dressed in the Union blue. The language of the emancipation had become a reality. As the heaving mass of laughing, crying humanity quieted down, I said, I propose closing up this interview by asking the band to play a particular tune. I've always thought Dixie one of the best tunes I ever heard. With malice toward none, with charity for all, let us bind up this nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, and to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. I wanted to go to the Confederate capital of Richmond to see the slaves for the first time without shackles, walking the streets as free men. Over 1,300,000 Negro men, women, and children had been freed by the emancipation. No, don't kneel to me. You must kneel only to God and thank him for the liberty you will enjoy hereafter. I am but God's humble instrument. But as long as I live, no one is going to put a shackle on your limbs. And you shall have every right that God has given to every other free citizen of this great republic. My friends, you are free. Free is the air. You may cast off the name of slave and trample on it. Liberty is now our common birthright. God gave it to you as he gave it to others. Try to deserve this priceless boon. Learn the laws and obey them. Obey God's commandments. Now let me pass on. I must return to Washington to secure for you the liberty which rightfully you prize so highly. The people of the North owe Mr. Lincoln nothing but eternal hatred and scorn. There are over 500,000 new-made graves, over 500,000 orphans, over 200,000 widows. And these are the things which we owe Mr. Lincoln. As the Lord liveth, we will pay him all we owe him someday. Him and all his bloody band of traitors. Mary, Mary, Mary. Oh, Mary. I can't say that I do believe in dreams. But you know, I had one the other night that has haunted me ever since. And strange as it may appear, that the first time I opened the Bible after this dream was at the 28th chapter of Genesis, which describes the dream that Jacob had. I'm sorry, Mary, I shouldn't have mentioned this, but the whole thing has got possession of me. And like Banquo's ghost, it will not down. It happened about 10 days ago. I was working very late into the night, waiting for dispatches to arrive from the front. And when I eventually retired, I soon began to dream. In my dream, there was a death-like stillness about me. I could hear subdued sobbing, as if a number of people were weeping. And in this dream, I got out of bed and I went downstairs. Silence was broken by some pitiful sobbing, but the mourners were invisible. I determined to find the cause. Arriving at the East Room, I was greeted by a sickening sight. Before me was a catafalque in which there was a corpse dressed in funeral vestments. Soldiers were standing around on guard. "Who is dead in the White House?" I asked. "The president," answered the soldier. "He was shot by an assassin." Then a loud burst of grieving woke me from my dream. I'm afraid, Mary, my old malady returned. Melancholia. You know, last night a peculiar incident occurred. You know that guard who is with me every evening? Mr. William Crook. Well, we have this silly little ritual, Mary. He says, "Good night, Mr. President." And I say, "Good night, Mr. Crook." Last night I said, "Goodbye, Mr. Crook," as if I would never see him again. Goodbye. Well, Mary, just my imagination. The reality is that the war ended 5 days ago. The Union has been preserved and the Negroes freed. We will yet find time to recite, as once I did when we were young, Mary, from Robert Burns. So fair art thou, my bonny lass, so deep in love am I, and I will love thee still, my dear, till all the seas gang dry, till all the seas gang dry, my dear, and the rocks melt with the sun. And I will love thee still, my dear, while the sands of life shall run. So, Mary, after a few more years here in Washington, you and me, we're going home, back to Springfield, to spend the rest of our lives in peace. I believe I shall go away from here a better man for having learned here what a very poor sort of man I am. I hope I have never knowingly planted a thorn in any man's bosom. For I believe that men weave in their own lives the garment they must wear in the world to come.